Hey guys, in this session let us see a simple test case on the different views related to the SQL statement in an Oracle database. So we have multiple views which can be used to monitor the SQL statements which are executed on the database in terms of the parsing, the execution plan information, and the number of sorts, number of executions. Okay, so there are a lot of information related to the SQL, and we have multiple different views related to SQL. Okay, so if you see, we have $SQL, we have $SQLSTATS, $SQLAREA, $SQL shared cursor, $SQL plan, and $SQL monitor. Okay, so there are a lot more views other than this, but these are the most commonly used SQL views in an Oracle database. Okay, so let us just create a test case and let us just monitor all these SQL statements. Okay, so in a real-time database, you may need this monitoring skill to monitor any specific SQL which is executed on the database. Okay, so let us just create a sample table first so that we can use this sample table for monitoring purpose. So we'll open two sessions in Putty and open two SQL Plus sessions. Now let us create a table called SQL test. Insert some sample data. Commit the transaction. Now we are going to check the number of rows where ID is equal to, number of rows from the table SQL test where ID is equal to 100. Okay, so this is the SQL statement that we execute. Okay, and we are going to execute multiple concurrent statements. So now let us set the cursor sharing to exact at the session level, and let us select 50 rows with the help of PL SQL procedure. Okay, so now the main goal of the session is to monitor that particular SQL that we executed using these views. Okay, so first we are going to use $SQL. Okay, so this $SQL is the most commonly used SQL monitoring view by every DBA. Okay, when it comes to the SQL statement. So here, if you see, I have just filtered the SQL statement with the from SQL test wildcard. Okay, so if you see, all the 50 executions of the particular SQL statement is printed here. Okay, and you can just describe $SQL. So you get lot of valuable information under this $SQL view. Okay, so we have SQL text, SQL full text, SQL ID, and the most commonly used columns are executions and invalidations, parse calls, discretes. Okay, discrete means physical discretes. Okay, direct writes, direct reads, buffer gets. Okay, so when it comes to the type of issue, we need to use certain columns. Okay, so every time when you are troubleshooting, you don't need to query all these columns. Okay, so when you are creating any SQL profile for a particular SQL statement, then you can use this SQL profile column. Okay, and when you are using any SQL patch, then you can query this column to check if any SQL patch is installed for that particular SQL. Okay, or if you need any SQL baseline information about the SQL statement, you can query this column. Okay, so I will give you more scenario based different sessions related to this in the future sessions. So if you just support and like this video, then I will just put a series of different troubleshooting sessions which will be helpful in your day-to-day DBA task. Okay, so just hit like and also hit comment, and if you are giving good support, then I can give you multiple scenarios on each and every columns of this. Okay, as of now, let us just see the high level. So if you see, we have child number, we have executions, parse calls, loads, invalidations, elapsed time. These are the different columns. Okay, so these are basic columns. So child number means it is the version. Okay, so to be simple, child number is completely related to parsing. Okay, so when the SQL statement is parsed, and if that particular SQL statement is executed with a different environment. Okay, so if I'm using optimizer mode, say for example, if I'm using all rows optimizer mode and for the first execution, and for the second execution if I'm using any other optimizer mode, then the child number will increment by 1. So here if you see, the child number is incremented for this particular SQL statement. So this SQL statement is executed 2 times. First time the child number is 0, second time it is 1. So if we need to find the reason, then we can go and check the $SQL shared cursor view. Okay, so what we will see in this view, multiple child number values for the same SQL text, and execution stats per child cursor, parse calls visible, cursor invalidations if stats change. Okay, so if the statistics of the particular object, right, which is part of the query, if it is not current, if it is not if the statistics changes, then we can check the invalidations column. Okay, so I will give you a different scenario separately for this. Yeah, so these are all the information which are given by $SQL. So what are all the use cases? So when there is a parsing issue, when there is a sharing, when the cursor cannot be shared, right? So specifically when the child cursor is used, then we can use this $SQL, and lot more than that. If you see, we can also check the number of buffer gets, physical reads, and also the elapsed time. That is very important, right? So out of all these columns, elapsed seconds, how much time that particular SQL statement has taken for the SQL to complete. So this is very important column. Okay, and when we face any issues with the executions, okay, if there are thousands of executions for a single SQL statement, then that is an issue. If multiple parse calls are there, then that is something related to parsing issue, right? So few number of parse calls is fine, but if there are significant number of parse calls, then that is an issue. Okay, so for one parse call there should be multiple executions. Okay, that is the rule of thumb. Okay, that means that the SQL statements are properly shared and they are properly executed in the database. So if you see one parse call per execution, then that means that the SQL is not shared. Okay, and Oracle is recreating the code every time a particular SQL statement is executed on the database. Always remember, one parse call per multiple executions, say 1000 executions. So this is efficient. Okay, so whenever PL SQL statements are used, then we may see these kind of this kind of ratio. Okay, so if you see one parse call per execution, per one execution, this means something, it is fine, but it's not completely bad, because every time in an Oracle database, application engineer cannot avoid this particular situation. Okay, so it is not possible every time to get one parse call with multiple executions. Okay, this is 100% efficient. Okay, so here the second one is 50% efficient, which means if you see, you can take the same SQL as an example. So here if you see, this particular SQL has been executed, parsed one time and also executed one time. So this should not be like this. Okay, why? Because there are two child numbers, so that's why each parse call having each execution. Okay, so here it should be something like one parse call with two executions, because if you see, there are two executions of this SQL, but because child number is incremented by 1, that's why here it is not showing as 2, here it is showing as 1. So if the child number is not incremented, then here it will be shown as 2, right? So if 1000 parse calls happen per one execution, then this is completely bad. Okay, so these are the informations related to child number, executions and parse calls. So we can use this view for troubleshooting these parsing issues. And loads, invalidation, so these are something else. Okay, these are not something related to the sharing, cursor sharing. Okay, so we'll see this later. And elapsed time, so let us go to another view. So if you see V $SQLSTATS, so this is also another view similar to V $SQL. Okay, and this is kind of an aggregate. It contains the cumulative value. So if you see one row per SQL ID, values aggregated across all child cursors. Okay, so V $SQL is not an aggregated value, but whatever information that is stored in the V $SQL will be aggregated and copied to this view. And it does not contain any parse call information or child number information. And another thing is, when you are not able to find any SQL statements from V $SQL, okay, say for example, I need this particular SQL ID. Okay, so I'm just querying V $SQL. Okay, but when I query V $SQL, it is showing no rows selected, which means V $SQL does not contain this particular the information about this SQL ID. Okay, because this SQL was executed recently, so not every SQL will be persisting under V $SQL. So after some time, the information from V $SQL will be erased. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure about how much time it will be, the data will be retained in V $SQL. So I will just check the documentation and will update you. But it will retain for almost a couple of seconds. That's it. Okay, unless until if there is any reason, like if there are the executions are more, then it may be retained in V $SQL. If the executions are not more, if it is a one-time execution, then it may not be retained in V $SQL. And V $SQLSTATS contains all the information which are not, all the SQL information which are not stored in V $SQL. So if you are not seeing this SQL in V $SQL view, then it will be definitely stored under V $SQLSTATS, because it is an aggregated value, so it will be retained for longer time. Okay, but still the data which is stored under V $SQLSTATS are also they also have some retention. Okay, they are not permanent. So we have DBA hist views. Okay, these AWR views contains all the historical information. Okay, so all the information will be copied to DBA hist views. So if you need if the AWR retention is 7 days, so if you need the last 7-day data, okay, then you need to go and check the DBA hist views. VDAR views are also dynamic, so they will flush all the information from the memory. Okay, so the VW views are completely memory related views. Okay, so they are not permanent. So DBA views are disk related views. Okay, so yeah, so next let us combine both these views and compare the information. Okay, so there is some issue with the SQL. Okay, so let us just ignore this part. Okay, so next let us go to the SQLAREA. Okay, so this is an old view or we can say legacy view. So this view is used in the older versions like 10G and before. Okay, but still this view is used in latest versions as well. Okay, so currently I'm using 19C, so this view is still there in 19C as well. Okay, so this view also contains a similar information like V SQL, like the executions, elapsed time, the parsing information. Okay, so if you want details related to SQL, you can also query this view as well. And the next one is V SQL shared cursor. Okay, so this view contains information about all the child cursors. Okay, which means version counts. So here we seen one parse call, multiple child numbers for this SQL. So let us use this SQL. Okay, so as I already mentioned that in the previous V SQL output, this SQL has been executed 2 times and it has 2 child numbers, 0 and 1. So if you want to find the reason why this SQL is not shared in the shared pool, right? So generally every SQL which are executing multiple times in the database should be shared. Okay, if they are not shared, then there is some reason for that. So you need to find out. That is also an issue. So some SQL statements may be having thousands of child numbers like this. So if thousands of child numbers are there, then that is really consuming lot of memory, and maintaining those child numbers is also quite tedious for the Oracle. Okay, and it may cause some latching performance issues in the shared pool. Okay, latch or library cache logs kind of issues. Okay, so you need to find the reason. So where you will find the reason why this child number is not why this child number is incremented and it is not this particular SQL statement is not shared from V SQL shared cursor. Okay, so here we have a reason column. So under the reason column you can see why it is not shared. Okay, so here if you see it is level RPA cursor. So it shows some reason. So we need to go and check the documentation for this. Okay, to understand the complete reason. So there are a lot of reasons. So here under this column you have Y. Okay, so wherever you see Y, that's where the issue, not the issue. That's why that's what the reason why that particular SQL statement cannot be shared in the share pool. So you can just describe this view as well to understand what is that column. Okay, so this is T. Okay, FAPT. So you can just check where F comes. Flashback cursor, FAPT. Okay, top level RPA cursor. Okay, so to know more details about this reason, then you need to go and check the documentation only. Okay, because if you see these reasons keep on updating okay, in latest versions. So if you go to 21C or 23AI, there may be further more reasons that may be added, because new features are coming up very frequently in Oracle as part of the release, right? So all the reasons may not be static all the time. Okay, few of them will be always there. Okay, so if you see optimizer mismatch, so these reasons will be always there. So it was there from 11G till current version. SQL type mismatch, so these reasons will be there always. But if you see top level RPA cursor, so this is somewhat you can say it is a very rare issue. It is not a frequently occurring issue, so we need to check the documentation for this. Okay, so optimizer mismatch will be the frequent sharing child cursor, the number of the reason for the number of child cursors being increased, right? And we can also see literal mismatch, force hard parse, explain plan cursor. So these are all quite common mismatches. Okay, now let us go to the next view. VWS SQL plan. Okay, so this is also an important view which is specifically useful in getting the details about the execution plan for a SQL. Okay, so this view contains all the information related to the execution plan. If you see access predicate, filter predicate, projection, CPU cost, IO cost, temp space. So this is similar to this explain plan. So let me just show you the plan details. Explain plan for this particular SQL. What the SQL is. Let me just check the SQL text. So let me just say explain plan for this SQL, and let me generate the execution plan, explain plan. Okay, so here if you see, we have operation column, we have name column, rows column, bytes column, cost column, time column. Okay, so if you need more information about this, then you can also check display cursor. Okay, so let me just again execute the SQL statement and get the information. So this is the SQL text. Okay, so yeah, this is the cursor related information. So you have predicate information, you have the node section which contains dynamic sampling information. So all these informations are stored under this VWS SQL plan view. Okay, so you have access predicates, CPU cost, IO cost, as I already mentioned, like cardinality, bytes. Okay, so this output is quite clumsy, so you can just format this output and you can see the execution plan information under VWS SQL plan. Okay, and next comes the VWS SQL monitor. Okay, so SQL monitor is, it is kind of a monitoring view. Okay, so we need to use monitor hint whenever we are using this, whenever we need to monitor any SQL using this view. So I'm just using monitor hint and executing the query. Okay. So I need to identify the SQL ID first. Yeah, this is the SQL ID. So now let me check V $SQL monitor view. Okay, so we have 17 views, 17 rows under this view. So this is the SQL. So now if you see, since I used this monitor hint, this SQL will be recorded under V $SQL monitor view. Okay, not all the SQLs will be recorded under V $SQL monitor view. This view is specifically for monitoring the SQL statement. So if any application developers or even if the DBA needs to monitor the particular SQL, and if he needs more information about monitoring the particular SQL, so as I already mentioned, V $SQL will not retain all the SQL statements for a longer time, and it also not contains more information about the SQL statement. So here if you see, this view also contains more information like parallel information. If the SQL statement is using max parallel, how many degree of parallelisms are used, and if the SQL gets errored out, then it also records the error message as well. Okay, and a lot more information beyond what V $SQL cannot monitor. Okay, so this is the use case of V $SQL monitor view. It is specifically, you are telling Oracle that I need to exclusively monitor this particular SQL. So you are using the hint to monitor it, and you will monitor the SQL in a cleaner way. Okay, without any clutter. Okay. Yeah. So this is the summary. So these are all the levels that these particular views store. Okay, and a lot more information, but these are all the basic information which are stored under V $SQL, V SQLSTATS and all the other views. Okay, so you can just go and try monitoring the SQL statements with all these views for your practice. Okay, so even it may be, it will be useful for your interviews as well, and if you are going for any Oracle database certification exams, it may be useful. Okay, so I will give you more information related to each and every views in the future sessions. Okay, so if you like this video, hit like, and also hit comment if you want any other topics to be demonstrated in the future. Okay.